Hi, welcome back to Reading Queen and happy Valentine's Day. Today I'm going to be reading A Tale of Magic, Chapter 4, The Truth About Magic. Let's get started. Every evening after cleaning the library, Bristol returned to the Justice's private room on the second floor to devour another banned title. The nightly ritual was by far the most dangerous exercise she had ever embarked on. Bristol knew she was playing with fire every time she passed the Justice's only sign, but she also knew she had struck intellectual gold. This was the opportunity of a lifetime. It could be her only exposure to such a treasure trove of truth and ideas. If she didn't risk the consequences now, Bristol was sure she would spend the rest of her life regretting it. With the completion of each banned book, Bristol felt like another veil had been lifted from her eyes. Everything she thought she knew about the Southern Kingdom, the laws, the economy, the history, how the army was run, what the class system was, it was all shrouded with conspiracies the Justices used to preserve their influence and control. The very foundation she was raised on crumbled beneath her feet, more and more with every page she turned. The most uncomfortable part for Bristol was wondering what her father's involvement was in the malicious schemes she read about. Was he even aware of the information Bristol was uncovering, or was he a leader in the corporation? Were some justices kept in the dark, or did they all play a part in the deception? And if so, did that mean her brothers would eventually become as dishonest and power-hungry as the other justices seemed to be? Her world was turned virtually upside down. But the banned titles also proved something that Bristol found profoundly comforting. She wasn't nearly as alone as she had feared. All the books in the secret room were written by people who felt and thought exactly like she did. By people who questioned information, who criticized social restrictions, who challenged the systems set in place, and who weren't afraid to make their ideas known. And for every person the Justices had successfully hunted down, there must be dozens who were still at large. Bristol just hoped the day would come when she would get to meet them. Despite the lucky discovery, Bristol was prepared for it to all end in disaster. Should she get caught in the act, Bristol thought continuing her role as a frivolous and innocent maid was her best chance at avoiding any trouble. She spent a great deal of time imagining what the interaction might sound like. "What are you doing in here?" "Me, sir? Well, I'm the maid, of course. I'm here to clean." "You are not allowed in this room. The sign on the door clearly states this room is for justices only." "I'm sorry, sir, but my employee's instructions were to clean every part of the library. He never mentioned certain rooms were off limits. Even private rooms get dusty." Fortunately, the library remained as empty and as quiet as always, allowing Bristol to read in safety. By the end of Bristol's second month of employment, she had read every banned title in the Justice's private library, except for one. As she retrieved the final book on the bottom shelf of the last bookcase, Bristol was consumed by a bitter-sweet sensation. For weeks, the secret room had been a private classroom where she got to study the most fascinating subjects imaginable. And now she was taking her final lesson. The Truth About Magic by Celeste Weatherbury. Curiously, unlike all the other books in the room, The Truth About Magic didn't have a file beside it. The cover was a pale violet and practically glowed in the dark chamber. The title was surrounded by an elaborate silver crest with a unicorn and a griffin on opposite sides. And the space between the creatures was filled with winged pixies, stars, and a crescent moon. It was by far the most beautiful book Priscilla had ever come across. Of all the topics she had read about in the private library, she was the least familiar with magic. She knew it was considered a demonic practice and a heinous crime. But other than the reactions to it, Bristol knew very little about magic itself. She sat at the table and excitedly opened the book to the very first page, eager to learn more. Dear friend, if this book has been found a way into your hands, I hope you are reading it in a safe place. As I'm sure you're aware, magic is a rather sensitive subject around the world. In most areas, possessing anything remotely related to magic is just as punishable as the act of magic. However, by the end of this book, you will learn that magic is as pure as existence itself, and why it's worthy of the world's admiration and respect. To get a proper perspective on what I'm saying, we must first take a look at history. Thousands of years ago, humanity and other intelligent species lived in harmony with members of the magical community. We were one another's neighbors, friends, and family. We helped one another, looked out for one another, and all worked together toward the same goals of peace and prosperity. Unfortunately, that all changed when humankind began its bloody quest for world domination. Before King Champion was crowned, the young sovereign in waiting had a wonderful relationship with the magical community. He pledged his loyalty to us, and in return, we aided his ascension to the throne. After Champion I's coronation, the king's first royal act was to establish his advisory council of high justices, and history was changed forever. The high justices saw magical people and their abilities as a threat. They filed Champion I's head with lies about our intentions to overthrow him and seize control of the kingdom. They rewrote the Book of Faith and convinced the entire kingdom that our spells, charms, and enchantments were demonic practices, and that our very existence was an abomination. So Champion I declared all members of the magical community to be witches and criminalized magic to the same caliber as treason and murder. Eventually, the other kingdoms followed Champion I's example, and the first witch hunt in recorded history began. Across the world, all alleged witches were arrested and executed. All the unicorns, dragons, griffins, pixies, and other animals deemed magical were slaughtered into extinction, and all the good that the magical community had done for humankind was erased from history. The High Justice's plan was so efficient that it became the template for how they dealt with all conflicts in the future. Hundreds of years have passed since Champion I's reign, but the stigma against people with magical blood is stronger than ever. In recent decades, King Champion the 11th changed the punishment for conjuring magic in the Southern Kingdom from death to imprisonment with hard labor. But this does nothing to salvage all the innocent lives being lost throughout the world. To this day, many people abandon their children or flee into dangerous territories just to avoid being associated with magic. But the very notion that magic is wrong or something to be ashamed of is the greatest misconception of our time. Magic is the beautiful and rare gift to manifest and modify the elements. It's a pure and positive art form used to create something from nothing. It's the ability to help those in need, heal those in pain, and improve the world around us. Magic can only be accomplished by those with goodness in their hearts, and they aren't the witches that popular belief suggests, but rather are known as fairies, and their talent should be celebrated, not suppressed. While witches do exist, they represent a very small fraction of the remaining magical community. The wickedness in their hearts prevent the witches from doing magic, so instead they practice a foul and destructive art called witchcraft. Those who commit witchcraft usually do it with destructive intentions. They deserve the harsh punishments they receive, but their vile ways should never be mistaken for the goodness that magic offers. It may seem complicated to differentiate a fairy from a witch, but there is a simple test that members of the magical community have used for centuries. By reading a passage of ancient text aloud, a questioning fairy or witch can easily determine where they stand. Akun, Aukun, Akel, Inama, Telmun, Talmun, Aktel, Oknomon. Bristol found the phrase so amusing, she read it out loud just to hear what it sounded like. Akun, Oknun, Akel, Inama, Telmun, Talmun, Aktel, Oknomun. She pronounced with a laugh. Did something macabre manifest nearby? Were you unexpectedly hit by a storm of locusts or a plague of fleas? Was your skin suddenly covered in blistering blemishes? If there are no visible changes to your body or imitate surrounding, then congratulations, you are not a witch. Now, by reading the next passage aloud, you can determine whether you are a fairy. Elsun, Elknoon, Akel, Inama, Delmoon, Dalmoon, Oktel, Oknamoon. Bristol knew reading the second passage would have as little effect on her as the first, but she enjoyed playing along with the author. It wasn't every day she took a test to determine whether she had magical capabilities. Alsoon, Elknoon, Akel, Inama, Delmoon, Dalmoon, Oktel, Oman. She read aloud. Did something beautiful appear? Are rubies and diamonds raining from the sky? Has your clothing changed into something more stylish than before? If so, then congratulations, you're a fairy. If reading the text resulted in no physical changes to you or your surroundings, then it is safe to assume that you do not have magic coursing through your veins. Although you are not a part of the magical community, I hope you will still support our efforts, find acceptance, and suddenly, Bristol was distracted by an unexpected smell, as if someone had lit a scented candle. The small room was consumed with the pleasant aromas of lavender, jasmine, and roses. Among the other fragrances, out of the corner of her eye, she saw something moving and jerked her head in its direction. To her absolute amazement, hundreds upon hundreds of flowers had begun growing out of the walls around her. Once the walls were covered, the blossoms sprouted across the ceiling, the floor, and through the bookcases. Bristol seemed as the phenomenon spread across the table in front of her and jumped out of her seat when she felt flowers grow from under her chair. Wait, what? What just happened? She asked in disbelief. Bristol knew exactly what had happened. She just didn't want to admit it. After reading a passage from a book about magic, she had unintentionally transformed the dull and windowless room into a vibrant and colorful floral wonderland. There was no other explanation for the change, but she rejected the implications with her entire being. No, this isn't real, Bristol told herself. This is just a hallucination caused by sleep deprivation. In a few seconds, it'll all disappear. No matter how many deep breaths she took or how hard she rubbed her eyes, the flowers did not vanish. Bristol became dizzy and her hands trembled as the inconvenient reality began to sink in. I can't be, she thought aloud. Of all the people in the world, this can't be happening to me. This can't be who I am. I have enough working against me as it is. I can't make magic on top of it all. Bristol was desperate to destroy all the evidence that proved otherwise. She hurried to the ground level of the library and returned with the largest waste baskets she could find. She frantically pulled all the flowers out of the walls and floor and furniture, and didn't pause until every petal and leaf had been tossed away and the justice's room was back to normal. Bristol placed the truth about magic on its shelf and dragged the waste baskets out of the private library. She closed the wide metal door behind her with the intention of never returning, as if she could keep the truth locked inside. For several days, Bristol pretended as if she had never found the secret room on the second floor. She told herself the truth about magic and the other banned books didn't exist, and that she had never read the spell that manifested the flowers. In fact, Bristol was in such denial about the ordeal that she went straight home every night after cleaning without reading anything at all, afraid the very sight of another book would remind her of what she wanted to forget. Unfortunately, the more effort she put into erasing the event from her mind, the more she thought about it. And soon it was no longer an issue of if it had happened, but of why it had happened. This all has to be a big misunderstanding, she said to herself. If I was magical or a fairy, as the author put it, there would have been signs. A fairy would know they were different. A fairy would have trouble blending in. A fairy would spend their whole life feeling like they didn't belong. Oh, shut up, Bristol. You've just described yourself. In many ways, having magic in her blood made sense. Bristol had always been so different from everyone she knew. Perhaps magic was the source of her uniqueness. Perhaps she had always wanted more out of life because deep down inside, she knew there was more to her life. But why did it take me so long to find out? She asked herself. Was I completely oblivious, or has a part of me known all along? Then again, I live in a kingdom that keeps all forms of knowledge from young women. Maybe this just proves how efficiently the justices are oppressing their people. And if I wasn't a menace to society before, I certainly am now. And now that she knew the truth, would it be easy for others to figure it out too? Would her classmates smell it on her as easily as her other differences? Was it possible to hide magic, or would it inevitably resurface and expose her? And if it did, would it finally give her father the right to disown her and send her away for good? The dangers were endless. Is everything okay, Bristol? Barry asked one morning before breakfast. Yes, everything is fine. Bristol was quick to respond. Why do you ask? No reason, he said with a smile. You've just seemed a little tense lately, and I've noticed you haven't been spending as much time at the Home of the Hopeless as usual. Is there anything you need to talk about? Oh, I've just decided to take a little break, she said. Something happened. Nothing serious, of course, but I thought a little distance would be helpful. It would give me a chance to think about things and figure out what to do next. Figure out what to do next? Barry asked with concern. All right, now you have to tell me what's going on so my imagination doesn't fill in the blanks. Bristol was so exhausted from worrying that she didn't have the energy to put on a show, so she told her brother a story that was as close to the truth as possible without giving anything away. I recently discovered something about myself that's a little hard to live with, she said. Barry's eyes went large. And that is? Well, I'm not sure I like Charity anymore. Barry did a double take at his sister's odd response. You've been tense because you don't like Charity anymore, he asked. Yes, Bristol said with a shrug. And quite frankly, I'm not certain how much longer I'll be able to hide it. Not that I know. I'm afraid other people are going to find out too. I'm terrified about what might happen to me if I'm ever exposed. Exposed? But Bristol, disliking Charity isn't illegal. It's just a preference. I know, but it's practically a crime, she exclaimed. The world is very cruel to people who don't like Charity. But that's just because they're misunderstood. Society thinks that disliking Charity is the same as disliking kindness, when in reality, disliking Charity and disliking kindness are very, very different. Oh, Barry, I wish I could tell you just how different they are because it's fascinating. One of the greatest misconceptions of our time. According to the expression on her brother's face, he might have been less concerned if she had just told him the truth. Barry was looking at his sister like she was on the verge of a mental breakdown, and to be fair, she was. How long have you disliked Charity? He asked. Almost a week, she said. And do you remember the incident that changed your mind? Yes, it all started when I accidentally covered a room in flowers, she said, forgetting to alter her story. There was a homeless woman who was feeling ill, so I filled her room with flowers to cheer her up. But it was the wrong room, a room I honestly had no business being in, so I had to throw all the flowers away before someone caught me. Right, Barry said. But prior to that moment, you had never disliked Charity before, had you? Not at all, she said. Before that, I didn't think I was capable of disliking Charity. Then that settles it, he said. You just had a bad day, and you should never let one day change who you are. We can never be certain about anything in life, especially if we only experience it once. We can't? Bristol asked with hopeful eyes. Of course not, Barry said. If I were you, I would go back to the Home of the Hopeless and give Charity another try to make sure you genuinely dislike it. Then, and only then, would I worry about being exposed for it. Although her brother had no idea what was really bothering her, brother thought he had given her excellent advice. After all, it took more than one trip on a boat to turn someone into a sailor. Maybe magic was similar. Perhaps it would take years of practice before she had to worry about it putting her life in danger. And like Barry suggested, there was always the chance the whole ordeal had been a fluke and would never happen again. Right or wrong, for her own sanity. Bristol had to find out. The following night, after she finished cleaning the library, Bristol returned to the justice's private library on the second floor. She put her reading glasses on, retrieved The Truth About Magic by Celeste Weatherbury from the shelf, and turned to the page with the ancient text. After a deep breath and a silent prayer, she read the incantation aloud to prove whether she was a fairy once and for all. Elsun Elgnun, Akel Inama, Delmun Dalmum, Actel Oknamon. Bristol was afraid to look and covered her eyes. At first she didn't feel or hear anything, so she peeked at the room through her fingers. Nothing appeared to have changed in the slightest, and Bristol's spirits began to soar. She watched the walls with bated breath, waiting for the flowers to materialize again. But they never came. Tears filled her eyes, and she let out a sigh of relief that turned into a long, thankful laugh. Perry was right, she said. We should never let one day change who we. Suddenly, the pages of The Truth About Magic started to glow. Bright orbs of white light slowly rose from the book and filled the dark room. As the orbs spread out, they became smaller and smaller, creating the illusion of depth in every direction. And soon the private library resembled a limitless galaxy. Bristol got to her feet and looked around the room in amazement. Not only had she confirmed the magic in her veins, but she never imagined she was capable of creating such a beautiful sight. The magic was transcendent, and Bristol forgot where she was. It didn't feel like she was standing in the private library anymore, but floating through her very own starry universe. Miss Bailey, what in the name of champion are you doing? The voice startled Bristol, and all the orbs throughout the room instantly vanished. When her eyes adjusted, Bristol saw the metal door had swung open without her noticing. Mr. Woolsor was standing in the doorway with 2 armed guards, and all 3 men were staring at her like she was the foulest creature they had ever seen. That's the girl I've been warning you about, Mr. Woolsor shouted, and he pointed a shaky finger at her. I've been telling you for months that she was up to something, but none of you believed me. You said I was mad for believing a young girl was capable of such things. Now look, we've caught a witch in the act. Mr. Woolsor, Bristol said. Wait, I can explain. This isn't what it looks like. Save your lies for the Justice Witch. You've been caught red-handed, the librarian yelled, and then turned to the guards. Don't just stand there. Seize her before she casts another spell. Bristol had imagined many scenarios where she was caught in the justice's private library, but she never imagined it would happen while she was conjuring magic. Before she had the chance to defend herself further, the guards charged towards her and forcefully grabbed her by the arms. No, you don't understand, she pleaded. I'm not a witch. Please, I'm begging you. Let me prove it. As the guards dragged Bristol out of the room, Mr. Woolsor snatched the reading glasses off her face and snapped them in 2. You won't be needing these where you're going, he said. Take her away.